Hello and welcome to another tutorial, this time for what looks like a Banshee in the game Sheol. Sheol is in early access on Steam. Go ahead and check it out if you like cool monsters, if you like kind of building and resource gathering mechanics. This lets you build your castle, and it's a fun game. I've really been enjoying it so far. What I've done to start out is when I think of a Banshee, I think of a high-pitched screeching, screaming sound. And so what I've done is I started out with a recording that I made of a metal back scratcher up against a pellet stove. And so without any effects, this is what we start out with. Okay, now what I've done is I've added some effects onto this. I started out with a pitch shifter in Unfiltered Audio's Biome plugin, turned it up by 15 semitones, adjusted the grain size and the blurring to where it sounded about right to me. And then I added a compressor to get rid of some of the peaks from those screeches so that the levels would be a little more even. So with the pitch shifting and the compressor, what we get is this. Let me move this out of the way of the window. So it's sounding a little more monster-like already. Next, what I've done is I added in some reverb using UAD's Lexicon 224. This is an excellent reverb. It's using the same algorithms as the original 224 hardware unit. So it gives a great late 70s dark reverb vibe that you heard on a lot of recordings from the late 70s and all through the 80s, and it's still in wide use today. What I used was the vocal plate setting, and the only thing that I changed was I added some more chorusing using the mode enhancement here. I even left it 100% wet, so we're only hearing the reverb sound, none of the dry signal. And here's what we get. So we can hear now that it is sounding much creepier, more monster-like. It's time now to add some other layers, and I'll be back with you once I've added those in. All right, and these next layers I'm just going to do together because things messed up the first time I tried recording them. So the next layer that I put in was a layer of my dog whining. And I can't show you the dry effect, but basically I added in some pitch shifting and some reverb. I used Unfiltered Audio's Fault to do the pitch shifting and a bit of delay and some frequency shifting as well. And I also added in the same Lexicon 224 reverb with the same setting, vocal plate, and all the way wet, and a little bit of extra chorusing. So here's what we have with Fault and the Lexicon reverb on my dog whining. All right, and the next step, what I did was I took some samples from my library of screams. And I'm going to sound like a horrible person here. My computer's full of sounds of dogs crying and women screaming. But here's what the screams started out as. Okay. And then if we add the effects back in, what I've done is I have pitch shifted using Wave Sound Shifter just this one clip, and I printed it in already. And then on both of these tracks, I've added in choral from Native Instruments, some chorusing. And then I have added in again the Lexicon 224. The only difference between these two tracks is that this top one for the longer, more sustained screams, I went ahead and left those effects both at 100% wet, whereas on this bottom track with the more grunts and screams of pain, then I went ahead and dialed back the mix knob on both of these. So here's what we've got with the effects. Okay, and with everything together, okay, so I did decide to add a few more layers and some effects. First off, what I've done is on the screams, I have used Unfiltered Audio's Fault again, but this time to pitch up the screams and add a little frequency shifting and some delay to make it sound a little more otherworldly. And I've added the same one on both of the screams. So with the Unfiltered Audio Fault, here's what we have. So the next sound that I added in was some packaging tape. Here it is in solo before I've altered it at all. So you may be wondering why I'm including this in a Banshee scream or any monster sound at all. I mean, it's packaging tape. It doesn't sound like a creature. But that brings us to a kind of a concept in sound design where you need to, in addition to thinking of the end sound, when you think of how to get there and what sounds to use to get there, and when you're listening for samples that you've got, you need to listen not to how does it sound now, but how can it sound? What can this be? And so here's what we have. Now, if I solo that packaging tape, I'll bring the volume up a little bit so that you can hear it. Here's what it is after some processing, and then I'll go into what processing I did. Okay, and when we tuck that in, that ends up making a great layer to stack on with the other sounds that we already have. So if we hear it all in context, it starts to make a lot more sense. That adds some extra air moving around creepiness to it. So what did I do to get packing tape to sound like that? I started out with Unfiltered Audio's Faults, pitch shifted it up an octave again, added more frequency shifting than I did with the screams, a lot more feedback in the delay line as well, and I took the sample rate down. and then ran it through a reverb using Native Instruments Realm, added in some feedback to the pre-delay, turned the mix fairly high, and kept the decay pretty long, added in quite a bit of diffusion, pulled the size back a little bit, and added in lots of modulation. The other thing that I did to process this was I time stretched it before it goes through that other processing. It went through a lot of time stretching, and I intentionally stretched it beyond what the time stretching algorithm was designed to handle. So you end up with a lot of glitchy artifacts. If I were to disable the plugins, you can hear it in here. It already sounds pretty ethereal or creepy. Let's pull the volume back up. So again, once we add that processing back in and pull the level down to where it blends in with the other tracks, we end up with something that contributes and adds to the fun of this sound. All right, and after balancing the levels, here's what we're at for our final Banshee sound. Well, thanks for watching with us again. If you want to look more into sound design or what it would be like to work in game audio, Akash the Cars page is an excellent resource for that. I'll go ahead and I'll put links to him up in the video and in the description. Check out what he has to say. I'm sure you'll find it helpful, as I've definitely found it helpful as well. Thanks again for watching. I hope to see you all next week when I'll be returning with another modular tutorial.